Hi, everyone. Welcome to Women's Wednesday. I'm Susan Tran, and we are having a conversation about women and doing it all and midlife career changes. And we have our guest, Sara Murray, joining us right now. Sara, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, you have had quite a career. You started as a Wall Street Journal reporter, and then you were a CNN White House correspondent, and now you just made a career change. And we're looking at some of your old photos in the field with Wolf Blitzer, so no big deal. Can you just kind of guide us through how this all started for you, how you decided to go from print, although it was the Wall Street Journal, over to CNN, and then making this huge pivot?
Yeah, I feel like there's been a lot of change, and if I had guessed at the beginning of my career that this is where I would end up at this stage, I certainly would have never been able to map it out in my head. But, I knew when I went to the University of Maryland, I studied journalism there. I knew I wanted to be a journalist at that point. And you kind of had to pick a track in a way you don't anymore, print or television. I picked print. That's what I was interested in. And when I started at the Wall Street Journal, it really felt like this great opportunity because I was starting as sort of an assistant, but it was a blend of, some admin tasks and research and that kind of thing. And then that grew into, a full reporter role. That became eventually this opportunity with CNN to cover politics, part of which I had been doing at the Wall Street Journal. I'd spent some time covering politics, but I never envisioned really having a career on air, but that's what happened when I went to CNN. And then when I started, kind of looking around for the next thing, I really loved doing the investigative work that I had previously done in newsrooms, and going to FTI Consulting was just a great opportunity for me to continue that kind of investigative work, particularly investigative work in the disinformation space, looking into smear campaigns, online disinformation, that kind of thing.
Was it difficult, though? Were you kind of sitting there and thinking, I don't know, but yes, I have to?
Yeah, I think there's always this kind of internal grappling you have to go through when it's like you've set this idea in your mind of like, I'm a journalist and I'm probably just going to spend the rest of my career working in, various shapes and sizes of newsrooms, doing this kind of thing. And so it did take a mindset shift and a certain amount of gearing up to be like, no, I really am ready for a new kind of challenge. Like, I'm ready to sort of like leave this cozy, nest of newsrooms that I've been in for nearly 2 decades, which I really loved, and find like the next thing that I could really love.
And was it intimidating? Because now you're taking all of this knowledge, but you're using it in such a different space as a national security expert for a consulting company, FTI. What was that like?
I think that the ego kind of like takes a hit whenever you make a big change like that, because you go from, working in newsrooms where you sort of like know the players, right? Internally and externally, the sources that are going to return your phone calls quickly, everyone you need to talk to get a story on air. And then you go to any new company whenever you make a new career and you're like, hey, can someone tell me where the bathrooms are? You truly just like start from this place where you're like, I know, nothing here. And then you realize, no, you actually know more than you think, right? The reason that I went into FTI to do work in national security investigations, work in disinformation investigations, is because I had been doing this kind of investigative work at CNN, and there were opportunities to take these skills into the private sector, to do this kind of work for private sector clients. And so once you kind of get up and rolling, I think things really do start to click and you start to see more and more similarities. And obviously it helps to have spent some time on camera. You don't feel the same like level of intimidation if you're going in and speaking to a CEO, speaking to a general counsel, having to brief the board on, what you just found.
But was it, it must have been so different, because when you're in the White House, you have, I'm sure that the president at one point, you covered President Trump, that he knew you by name at some point. You would know world leaders and lawmakers and all of these deal makers. And then you switch over, not that it's not exciting, but it does feel like a whole different gear shift. shift.
It is a different gear shift. It's a different level of exciting. You know, I covered many a Trump rally, of course, when I covered his first presidential campaign. So I was very familiar with the cadence of those particular kinds of events. But, you know, before that, I had worked at the Wall Street Journal, and I had covered the fallout from the financial crisis in 2008. I had covered global economics. I had interviewed lots of CEOs. I had covered immigration policy. And so there has been a lot of overlap in kinds of when you think about the types of people you're dealing with, right? When you're dealing with kind of corporate clients, when you're dealing with C-suite executives, I would say there's sort of more overlap than you would expect in terms of the caliber of folks that you're talking to, that you deal with in some of these engagements when they happen in the private sector as compared to, you know, when you're a reporter. And look, part of the reason that FTI brings people in who have these kind of real world experiences is because they want people to bring that experience with them. They want you to take what you learned from a newsroom, take what you learned from, you know, traveling the country and covering politics, take what you learned from talking to world leaders and to CEOs, and to bring that base of knowledge with you, and you're helping clients work through some of their toughest issues. And of course, they want you to bring the Rolodex with you as well.
But at that point, though, it's a little bit of an adversarial role. You know, as a journalist, you're asking and probing questions, and it's a different attitude when you're with corporate CEOs or company executives who you're trying to get them to engage, but you're not you're on their side.
Yeah, I think you're working for the client, of course. Like, we are always like working with our clients to try to help them through something that they are struggling to deal with. You know, if you are embroiled in this smear campaign, like, you are really working with them to find their way through it, to figure out who's behind it, to figure out what their mitigation strategy is going to be. And so you're working hand in hand. And so a client relationship is certainly not the same, you know, as a source relationship. It's a different kind of engagement. But I do think a lot of the things, and, you know, I'm sure you'll understand this, a lot of the maintenance you do to keep source relationships going, like, you do have to apply that to clients. Like, you need to be able to reach out to people. You need to know how to foster relationships with people. You need to know how to keep those relationships alive. And certainly some source relationships can be adversarial, but not all of them.
Yeah. All right. You're watching Women's Wednesday. We're talking to Sara Murray. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Women's Wednesday. I'm Susan Tran, and we are speaking to Sara Murray here and talking about kind of like a work-life balance. You left as a White House correspondent for CNN. You're now a national security expert with FTI Consulting. Can you talk a little bit about what that's like when the expectation is, yeah, you can do it all. You can do all of these things and be an ace at them.
Are we talking about all the things work-wise or all the things
all
life-wise?
the things work, life, marriage, health?
We kind of joke, like me and some of the other women at FTI, you know, are you doing it all? Are you having it all? Do you have work-life balance? I mean, we sort of treat it a little bit like a punchline because to me at least, I sort of think that that's a myth. I mean, I just think it's impossible to go through a day and feel like I am nailing work and, you know, childcare and my marriage and self-care, whatever that means on a given day, like working out, you know, going outside and seeing the sunlight, whatever it is. I feel like on a good day, you know, maybe I nail 3 of those things, but like that's like a really good day if I like manage to wake up at 5 o'clock in the morning. You know, I just think for a lot of women, and this is true for me, you are really going through phases in your life. And some of those phases, it's like, I need to be, you know, all in on what's going on at work, and I need to bring in extra help to help with the kids. And some of those phases, it's like, no, my kid needs a little extra attention right now. And some of the other things are going to have to be a little bit more on the back burner. I just think that sort of shifts through the phases of your life.
Can you share the story that you were talking about, the life changes that you've had to make to accommodate a very demanding career?
Yeah, when I think about, you know, some of these kinds of trade-offs, you know, I think back to when I was pregnant with my son, who was our first child. I was probably about 7.5 months pregnant. I was on this baby moon with my husband. We were at the beach. We were having a great time, and I ended up cutting my baby moon short because President Trump, then the former president, now the current president, was turning himself in at jail in Fulton County, Georgia. And I had been covering this story. I had been working on this investigation for over a year. And I just felt like it was really important for me to be there. So I cut the baby moon short. I flew to Georgia. I did live coverage outside of the jail in, the sweltering heat all day long while super pregnant. And, that was a trade-off I made because it was important to me. And on the flip side of that, obviously that was giving a lot to work. But on the flip side of that, when I was on maternity leave this time around with my second child, our daughter, who's now 6 months, they were having this kind of global leadership summit for our group, for the cyber group. And so it was a great opportunity for everyone to meet their counterparts across the globe. And I was still on maternity leave, and I just was not in a position where I felt like I had the backup or the ability to leave my newborn behind. And so I kind of had to forfeit that networking opportunity.
Do you think it was worth it when you look at it? When you look back and you think, I was standing out there in Georgia heat, 7.5 months pregnant, cutting my life with my husband to enjoy this time together. Was it worth it?
I feel like in that moment, it was worth it, and I think that my husband was on the same page with me in that moment where he's like, you have spent so much time on this investigation. You've broken so much news in this investigation, This is a moment. It's going to be a huge moment, of course, for cable news. You really should be there. And, he's been so supportive of those moments, and I appreciate it. But it can't always be the answer, right?
Yeah.
I do think those kinds of things, though, sometimes those decisions are easy and you feel like, great, I made the right choice. And then other times those kinds of things can really nag at you. And that's why I think this notion of having it all is a little bit of a myth.
And do you think we need to change or pivot or kind of re-examine why we keep saying it to other women? Because the expectation is heavy.
Yeah, I don't know why we keep saying it. I don't know why we can't just accept the reality. And again, maybe some people are having it all. But for a lot of people, maybe the reality is I'm not having it all at the same time.
Right.
This is going really well now, and this other thing may be going really well 6 months from now. It may just ebb and flow, and maybe we don't have to be 100% at everything all of the time. I don't know how it would be possible to be able to, give 100% to my job and not be kicking in a little extra childcare. I'm very thankful for our nanny who is always game to help out so I can do that.
So maybe not. Yeah, I feel like we have the pressure. It exists. And I don't know what the conversation is or how to equalize it. What is it going to take so that we don't keep saying that? And so they're not the same pressure for dads, but that there's at least a conversation that they have to make sacrifices too.
It's definitely a different conversation. I do think the way that we sort of see dads out in the world is changing. My mom has laughed about this because my husband is happy to be out there in the baby Bjorn carrying our baby daughter around. And my mom will joke this is something that I don't think I ever saw your dad do, when
Right.
you guys were growing up. So I do think things have changed. And I think, for me, I can only speak for my experience in this. The answer has been this, having it all, as long as I treat it like a punchline in my day and not an expectation,
Right.
that's what works for me.
Right. And 3 out of 6 can be just as all as
And if I'm not
one.
nailing it today,
Right.
I'm nailing it there's a good chance of nailing it tomorrow.
What would that advice, though, be for you to tell someone in your position as a young mom with a career?
I just tell people that you feel like it's hard because it's hard. Right? It's hard to do both things. We shouldn't be trying to convince people that you're going to have a newborn and you're going to return to work and that everything is going to go seamlessly and you're never going to have any problems. I feel very privileged that I have this career that has been so incredible and that I have loved every iteration of, and that I also have this family that I love and that I want to spend more time with. And that's actually an incredible problem to have, to want to be able to devote so much of myself to both sides of that equation. But you can't expect that it's going to be 100% seamless and that it's going to be super easy, and we shouldn't be setting that expectation.
All right, we'll be right back. You're watching Women's Wednesday. Welcome back to Women's Wednesday. We are talking about work-life balance, midlife career change with Sara Murray, a former White House correspondent for CNN and now a national security expert. So your career path has really run the gamut. And before we left, we kind of were talking about just what you would advise younger women, young moms with careers in kind of reevaluating this notion of having it all or making these life choices. Was there kind of a checklist that you went through on that helped to guide you?
I don't know that there was like a checklist that I went through. I think when I was trying to decide, what I wanted to do next in my career and my life, like I really thought about what was making me really happy in the roles that I'd had before, what I felt really passionate about, like when I had worked in newsrooms, I did cover the White House, yes, but after that, I worked on investigations, and that is the kind of thing that really interested me. It was the kind of thing where, I could put my kid to bed and then I would go back to it because I just wanted to get to the bottom of something. I just wanted to untangle something. And so I tried to follow that thread when I was thinking about what would I want to do next that I think would actually really stimulate my brain and be exciting. And that is why FTI worked out, because they have, a client base, and we're growing a client base that has these really high stakes problems in the national security space, problems with nation state actors, problems with disinformation campaigns, whether it's smear campaigns or LLM poisoning or,
what is
LLM poisoning?
Yeah.
So you're poisoning, like, let's say ChatGPT or Claude, because you want to sink your competitor, for instance. That kind of thing.
That's happening?
Yes, that is happening. And so they're trying to get to the bottom of these wild issues, and they come to us and, at a place where they're like, I can't believe I'm in the middle of this and I want to get to the bottom of it. And we're like, great, we can help you do that. And that to me is the kind of thing where it's like, okay, after I put the kids to bed, I get excited to dig into that again. I can get excited to dig into it during the workday, and I can get excited to go back to it later. And so I think we live in a time where your career is not this linear thing necessarily, where you're going to be working at the same company for 30 or 40 years. But if you're identifying the things where you're like, this is actually the core of the thing that is really exciting me, to keep following that thread, you're going to find all kinds of opportunities.
It is so different, because the advice that our parents probably would have given us is find a great company, work for that great company, and the pension will await you. And things are so different now.
Yeah, it is so different. And, one of the best pieces of advice that I got from a friend of mine is that you are your own CEO. You are the CEO of your career. You're the CEO of your future. No one's getting up in the morning and thinking, I wonder what Sara Murray, wants to do next. Like, what does she want to be when she grows up? And so it's up to you to build this sort of kitchen cabinet of mentors and to identify the things that are really exciting you, and then figure out what the opportunities can be from there. And it may look a lot different than what you initially thought. Certainly, I am, now working as a national security expert at FTI Consulting, which is not what I thought I would be doing when I was graduating from the University of Maryland. But following that kind of advice, I feel like has really worked out well for me.
And what kind of advice would you have given yourself as a younger you? Like, you're fresh and excited, and now you have experience and you're looking back. Like, what would you have told yourself?
I think I just would have said, you can plan all you want, and that's great. Go wild. But it's going to be just more exciting and so much messier and so much more fun than anything that you are mapping out.
Do you think that kind of becomes a bit of a problem when there are people, especially type A people, who are like, these are the things I'm going to do, and it's A, B, C, and D, and then I'm going to do X, Y, and Z, and then things don't always work out. Most times they do not work out.
To be clear, I'm a type A person. So
I am too. I know what that means and feels like.
Yes, I resonate with that. And I think you really just have to be open to all kinds of opportunities. A lot of people say like their biggest failures are the things that shape them, and that could be true. And I definitely think anytime you miss out on an opportunity, it's because something else is coming around. And I think certainly type A people, we can get like a little stuck on, oh, that's the thing that passed me by, as opposed to like, okay, that thing passed me by because there was this other incredible thing that was coming. And you kind of got to like keep your eyes open and look at the, you know, the whole horizon of the things that are coming.
Yeah, there are going to be a lot of pitfalls and failures. And I feel like that's where you learn. And sometimes you forget that you have days where you excel and rock it, and then days you learn.
I think about that, you know, when I was working in television, it's like some of your days you're live for 12 hours and you just feel like you're nailing it and every live shot looks incredible and you're saying the right thing. And then there are some days where you're like, can I speak at all today? Like, why are the sentences not coming out? And it's obviously much more noticeable to you, hopefully, than to the audience at home, but that is being human.
Yeah. And I feel like it does land for a lot of young people, especially now, that it is part of the authenticity of who you are and what your life is about. And that's the track that you should continue on forward.
Yeah, I think, you know, authenticity is what's powering, right, like the creator economy right now. So I definitely think that is something that probably the generations that are coming after us really understand, and that has been more of like a learning curve for us to catch up to.
I really do thank a lot of the younger generation for things like work-life balance. I don't even know if we would have really considered it without their kind of nudging forward.
Well, they came up in a different environment in the pandemic and everything. Like so much has changed.
Yeah. All right. Thank you so much, Sara Murray. And you're watching Women's Wednesday. Have a great one.